In April 1944, the Nazis began to systematically terrorize Jews living in Hungary. Germany invaded the following March, and the Hungarian leadership agreed to fully collaborate with their occupiers. The first act of the Hungarian officials was to force the country's 800,000 Jewish citizens to hand over all their valuables. They gathered up gold, jewelry, gems, diamonds, pearls, watches, paintings, oriental rugs, silverware, furniture, cameras, stamp collections, and currency. The estimated value of the collection in 1945 was 350 million. The man in charge of the stolen assets was a Hungarian official named Arpad Toldi. Toldi concocted a plan to get the Jewish loot out of Hungary and ultimately into Switzerland. He commandeered a 42-car train, filled 24 cars with the stolen treasure, and began an arduous 3-month journey to Austria. The train, loaded with stolen Jewish gold and possessions, got as far as the coal mining town of Brenberg Banya. There, Toldi started sorting and crating the plunder. By the time the gold train began the second leg of its journey in 1945, the war was almost over. Now, fearing for his own safety and unwilling to share the riches, Toldi devised a plan to double-cross the crew of the train. During the night of March 30th, 1945, Toldi and a few trusted aides left the train with the most valuable of the loot. The aides loaded the treasure onto trucks. Toldi instructed the train's crew to continue to its ultimate destination, the Swiss-Austrian border, and told them he'd meet up with them there. Instead, Toldi led the truck convoy toward Switzerland. The train was now just a decoy. Meanwhile, Toldi, leading the convoy containing the most valuable jewels and bullion, realized he couldn't get into neutral Switzerland. He was forced to make a drastic decision. He had the crates buried in various Austrian villages, with the intention of retrieving them once the war was over. At least 6 of the crates have never been found.
George Soros was born in Budapest, Hungary on August 12, 1930. Well, actually, back then he was named Georgi Schwartz, but his dad changed his name to make it sound less Jewish. In fact, he had his whole family change their names. Supposedly, his dad chose Soros as their last name since he was really into the Esperanto language, and Sori means to soar in Esperanto. George learned Esperanto himself growing up. Soros also means, quote, next in line in Hungarian. So anyway, the name change was due to a sharp rise in anti-Semitism in Hungary during the 1930s. After the Nazis occupied Hungary in March 1944, they prohibited Jewish children from going to school and forced them to work. George and his family probably avoided being sent to concentration camps by buying documents that said they were Christians. His family was fairly well off and had connections, so they were able to do such a thing. When George was 14, he began pretending to be the Christian godson of a Hungarian government official named Bambach, who himself had a Jewish wife in hiding. One time, he brought George with him while he completed an inventory of a Jewish family's confiscated estate. Stephen Croft interviewed him for 60 Minutes back in 1998. At first glance, Soros kind of comes across as a sociopath, feeling no remorse for apparently helping to take away Jewish property, even though by this time he clearly knew the Nazis were responsible and he was going along with it.
My understanding is that you went out with this protector of yours who swore that you were his adopted godson.
Yes, yes.
Went out, in fact, and helped in the confiscation of property from the Jews.
That's right.
I mean, that sounds like an experience that would send lots of people to the psychiatric couch for many, many years. Was it difficult?
Not at all. Not at all. So Klaus Schwab's father, who was managing director of the main factory in Ravensburg, was not only making submarine parts and aircraft parts for the Nazis and potential atomic bomb casings for the Nazis as well. They were also making the large turbines that would power the heavy water hydroelectric dams that they normally built them for. It was the same way they enriched uranium for their type of process of atomic bomb making. And so he was a very important man, Eugene Schwab. Of course, the Nazis weren't successful, and when Klaus was growing up, Germany was being reconciled. It was trying to change its image to the rest of the world. They were trying to say, look at us, we're now kind, we got over it. And at the same time, America was kind of learning some of the tools that the Nazis had used. The American intelligence services were using some of those tools to kind of do the same tricks the Nazis were pulling in an attempt to fight communism. You know, for a good aim, they were saying, we're going to fight back these Soviets. Before it, we need to get dirty. And they started, of course, we know Operation Paperclip. They started bringing people in. And there was lots of projects set up. And in 1950, there was a special project set up in Harvard called Kissinger's International Seminar. It was actually set up by William Yandell Elliott, a grandee of American politics, who basically had been advisor to 6 different presidents throughout his career, as a high-ranking CFR member, and he invented this seminar, which a newly graduated Kissinger was put in charge of, and it was about training young global leaders. And in 1965 or 64, Eugene Schwab, Klaus Schwab's father, would say to Klaus, the only place you're going to go to succeed in the world now is Harvard. And he went and got offered a place, because you didn't apply for Kissinger's International Seminar. You were often headhunted. You could apply, but only the best got in. And they were looking for the best potential young leaders. And Klaus Schwab, in 1965, joined the ranks of Kissinger's International Seminar, which he graduated in 1967 and was a CIA-funded course. Peter Schmidt-Heine said, hey, we've got a merger going on between Sulzer AG, Brown Boveri, Escher Weiss. We're merging them into a new company, and we want you at the helm. And what did Klaus Schwab do? He becomes second in charge of this merger and of these companies, and then the companies started selling illegally weapons technology, nuclear weapon technology, to the South African apartheid regime, so they could make bombs, which they made 6 bombs complete. They never tested their bombs. They made 6 complete nuclear bombs, with a 7th that was basically being constructed when they finally dismantled the program. This all came out in Swiss courts as well, so this is all documented in evidence. And this is why Klaus Schwab was at them. He did exactly the same as his father. His father helped a racist Nazi regime to try and create the atomic bomb to win World War II. And Klaus Schwab went on afterwards with his father's, pushing it on from behind to do exactly the same thing with South Africa.
We're still putting 162 million tons into it every single day, and the accumulated amount is now trapping as much extra heat as would be released by 600,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every single day on the Earth. That's what's boiling the oceans, creating these atmospheric rivers and the rain bombs, and sucking the moisture out of the land and creating the droughts and melting the ice and raising the sea level and causing these waves of climate refugees.
And in 2017, right before his documentary An Inconvenient Sequel opened, the National Center for Public Policy Research, a conservative think tank, estimated the vice president used 21 times more energy than the average American. That's just in the Nashville home.
I think it's around things like, how do you make sure you get the right scientific cooperation and the cooperation between the regulatory authorities, so in the future you can clear things much faster? I think there's a huge impetus now for a national digital infrastructure. Digitization in healthcare is, I think, one of the great game changers. We should be helping countries to develop a national digital infrastructure, which they will need with these new vaccines. In the end, you need the data. You need to know who's been vaccinated and who hasn't been. Some of the vaccines that will come on down the line will be multiple. There'll be multiple shots. So you've got to have, for reasons to do with the healthcare more generally, but certainly for a pandemic or for vaccines, you've got to have a proper digital infrastructure. And many countries don't have that. In fact, most countries don't have that.
And that's why on pandemic preparedness, we support efforts to develop a new global health legal instrument, strengthened international health regulations, and a strong and empowered World Health Organization.
What we are very proud of now, the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are for our actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. But you never have heard from me political statements or economic statements which are, let's say, in any way influencing political personalities.
And there you have it, Klaus Schwab first bragging about how he has penetrated the cabinets of most countries, and then a little bit later, a couple of years later, saying he has no influence at all on political personalities. Well, there you have it. This is the first video I know of that gives you the background of George Soros and the background of Klaus Schwab in one handy package. Just as a review, George Soros, as a teenager, went with a guy whose job it was to go to the homes of Jewish people and inventory their houses, what was in their houses, so the Nazis could steal it and then send them to concentration camps. So that's how he got his start in life. And then how Klaus Schwab's father died in the wool Nazi, worked on top weapons programs for the Nazis. And when the war ended, somehow did not end up in prison. Instead, he continued on, as so many Nazis did after the war. The vast majority of Nazis continued after the war. Some of them had to escape to South America, but a whole bunch of them just stayed in Germany, and they were just fine. And then they put Klaus in charge of or made him one of the senior executives of a company that did the exact same thing that his father did, specifically build parts for nuclear weapons programs. And then Klaus was involved in an illegal arms scam that exported nuclear weapons technology to South Africa. So that's how he got started. Are you surprised that nobody has ever told you these things before? It's amazing, isn't it? And then we gave a few clips of some of the people that are in the Klaus Schwab, George Soros orbit. So that's Brass Check. I don't really know what the other podcasters are doing. If you'll remember correctly, most of them were pushing the vaccine mania and the COVID mania until just a year or two ago. And we obviously were the first out of the gate to call bullshit on that. And amazingly, we're the first to assemble this, admittedly rough video, but you can see in their own words the background of these guys and how they think and who they are. And why should anybody be surprised at what they do? That's Brass Check. Okay.
Brass Check TV, free to you, not free to us. We've got a server bill, we've got an email software bill, we've got a tech helper bill, and that happens every month. So to everybody that is supporting us financially, that's paying for their subscription in one way or another, we really appreciate it. If you're not, consider doing so. Everybody's got money for the newspaper and the cable bill and all that. Do you have money for media that's actually serving you? That's really the issue here. And when you help us, it allows us to get this information out to the world. So thanks to all our supporters, and if you're not a supporter already, please consider becoming one.